The room where nobody laughed. The room was designed to make people feel small, not intentionally, not cruelly, but deliberately. The walls were poured concrete, painted a sterile, institutional gray. No windows, no flags, no portraits of heroes. Only a recessed seal of the Department of Defense mounted behind the head of the table, bronze dulled by decades of fluorescent light. The ceiling hummed faintly, HVAC always on, a reminder that even silence here was engineered. This was Building 17, Conference Room C, and everyone in it knew exactly why they were there. 23 officers sat around the table, colonels, lieutenant colonels, one civilian analyst from the Pentagon who hadn't taken notes yet but already looked exhausted. Two master gunnery sergeants stood against the back wall, hands folded, eyes forward, unreadable. And at the head of the table sat Major General Thomas R. Kessler, United States Marine Corps. He was smiling. That, more than anything else, made people uneasy. General Kessler had the kind of presence that didn't need to raise its voice. He was broad-shouldered, even in his late 50s, hair clipped tight, posture still razor-straight. He had commanded infantry units in Fallujah, overseen joint task forces in Syria, and now ran a quietly powerful modernization directorate overseeing classified operations most Marines never knew existed. When he smiled like that, it usually meant he was about to say something that would ripple outward for years. At the far end of the table, deliberately far, sat Captain Eliza Liza Moreno. She had been told to sit there. No rank insignia removed, no special instructions, just a simple email the night before. Captain Moreno, report to Building 17, Conference Room C, EO 700. Service uniform. Be seated when you arrive. No subject line, no explanation. She arrived at 6:43 anyway. Moreno sat with her back straight, hands folded loosely in front of her. Her service alpha uniform fit perfectly, pressed sharp enough to cut paper. Ribbons aligned, hair in a regulation bun so neat it looked sculpted. She did not fidget. She did not scan the room. She did not look impressed. But inside, her pulse moved slowly, deliberately, the way it always did before something important. She knew rooms like this. She had learned early that rooms didn't announce danger. They disguised it as professionalism. General Kessler cleared his throat. The murmurs stopped instantly. "All right," he said calmly. "Let's come to order." A soft chorus of "yes, sir" followed. Kessler's eyes moved once around the room, a practiced sweep, before landing briefly on Moreno, not lingering, not dismissive, just noting. "As you all know," he began, "this review board exists to evaluate operational performance, risk oversight, and leadership accountability within Task Group Orion." Several officers stiffened slightly at the name. Task Group Orion didn't officially exist. Recent events, Kessler continued, have raised questions. Questions about authority, about discretion, about judgment. He paused. "Before we get into the weeds, though, I'd like to acknowledge our newest attendee." His gaze returned to Moreno. "Captain Moreno." She stood immediately. "Yes, sir." Her voice was calm, even, unremarkable, which, in a room like this, made it remarkable. Kessler nodded once. "At ease, Captain." She sat. "Captain Moreno is here today," he said, "as both a subject matter contributor and an observational presence. Some of you may have worked with her indirectly. Others may have only heard stories. A few quiet glances exchanged around the table. Stories traveled fast in the military, especially the unofficial ones. Kessler leaned back slightly in his chair. "Let's start with something lighter," he said, tone casual, almost friendly. "We've been buried in metrics all morning." No one laughed. He turned his hands palm up. "Captain Moreno, I understand you've logged more operational deployments than most officers your age." "Yes, sir. And I also understand," he continued, "that some of those deployments involved kinetic outcomes." Moreno felt the shift. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. This was a pivot. Kessler smiled again, wider this time, and glanced around the table. "Tell me, Captain," he said lightly, "what's your kill count these days?" The word landed hard. Kill. Not engagements, not confirmed actions, not enemy combatants neutralized. Kill count. The room froze. Not because officers hadn't heard the word before, they had, but because of where it was spoken, how, and by whom. This wasn't a bar. This wasn't a debrief tent. This wasn't whispered between people who'd already seen too much. This was a formal review board, and it was said like a joke. A couple of officers shifted uncomfortably. One colonel forced a thin smile, then thought better of it. The civilian analyst stopped pretending to check his tablet. Moreno did not move. She did not blink. For half a second, it felt like the air itself was waiting. Kessler watched her closely now, curiosity replacing humor. "Well?" he prompted gently. This was the moment. Every Marine in that room understood the unspoken test. She could deflect, she could downplay, she could make herself smaller, she could joke back, defuse it, survive the room. That was the easy path. Moreno chose none of them. She inhaled once, slow and silent, and then spoke. "Sir," she said evenly, "I don't keep a kill count." A few eyebrows rose. Kessler tilted his head slightly. "No? No, sir. Why's that?" Moreno met his eyes. Not challenging, not deferential. Simply present. "Because," she said, "the number wouldn't tell you anything worth knowing." Silence. Real silence this time. Not polite. Not awkward. The kind that presses inward. Kessler studied her, the smile fading. Not replaced by anger, but by something sharper. "Explain," he said. Moreno nodded once. "My job," she said, "was never about numbers. It was about outcomes, missions completed, lives protected, teammates brought home." She paused, just long enough. "And the cost," she added quietly, "doesn't fit neatly into a statistic." No one spoke. The room had shifted again. Deeper now. This wasn't defiance. This was truth, spoken without armor. Kessler leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You understand," he said, "that in my line of work, metrics matter." "Yes, sir. And yet," he continued, "you're refusing to provide one." Moreno's voice did not change. "I'm refusing to reduce something irreversible into something casual." The words settled like weight. Somewhere in the back of the room, one of the master gunnery sergeants exhaled slowly through his nose, the closest thing to approval he would ever show in public. Kessler sat back. For the first time since the meeting began, he looked uncertain, not threatened, but recalibrating. He tapped a finger lightly on the table. "Very well," he said. "Let's proceed." But something had already cracked. Moreno sat back, hands still folded, pulse steady. She hadn't planned to say any of that, but she had learned long ago that when silence is asked to carry a lie, it becomes complicity. And she had never survived by being complicit. What no one in that room knew yet, what they could not know, was that the joke had touched something buried beneath layers of commendations and classified files. Something unresolved, something dangerous. And by the end of this review, careers would end, truths would surface, and the room would remember her answer long after they forgot the joke. Cliff beat. The joke is over. The silence has begun, and the system is now watching her very closely. Moreno's first night operation, the incident that made her untouchable and targetable, the quiet politics already moving against her, the weight you don't put on paper. The desert does not care who you are. It does not respond to rank, courage, or intent. At night, it becomes something older, a vast, breathing thing that absorbs sound and light and memory alike. Moreno had learned that lesson on her first deployment with Task Group Orion. No fanfare, no send-off, just a C-17 rolling to a stop on an unlit strip somewhere that did not appear on any map she was allowed to keep. The ramp dropped. Heat rushed in like an accusation. She remembered the smell most, hot dust and aviation fuel, sharp and dry, and the way the stars looked unreal, too many of them, as if the sky itself had been punched through. "Welcome to nowhere, Captain," someone muttered behind her. She didn't turn. Task Group Orion operated in the margins. Joint, rotational, compartmentalized. Marines, Army Special Operations, intelligence liaisons who didn't wear uniforms and never gave last names. Everyone knew just enough to do their job, and not enough to compromise anyone else. Moreno had been assigned as a fires integration officer, on paper. In reality, she was there because she could think under pressure without needing to be seen thinking. They noticed that quickly. The first night mission came 3 days in. No speeches, no hype, just a low, controlled briefing in a plywood structure lit by red bulbs. Target: a moving logistics cell supporting an insurgent network that specialized in ambushes and disappearances. They weren't top-tier fighters, not flashy, but they were effective. They killed quietly and blended back into the population. The kind of enemy that didn't show up in victory photos. Moreno listened, asked 3 questions, made 1 note. When the briefing ended, the team began their ritualized movements, checking weapons, radios, night vision. She stood apart, reviewing terrain imagery on a tablet, mentally overlaying distances and elevation. A senior NCO, Gunnery Sergeant Paul Haynes, watched her for a moment before stepping closer. "You ever been out with us before, Captain?" he asked. "Yes, with this unit?" "No." He nodded once. "Stick close. Don't be brave." She met his eyes. "I won't," she said, and she meant it. The helicopters lifted without lights. Inside the bird, the noise was total. Vibration rattling through bone, air whipping against skin. Moreno sat still, helmet heavy on her neck, eyes closed, not in prayer but in calculation. Time, fuel, distance, wind. When they touched down, the desert swallowed the sound faster than she expected. They moved in silence. The night vision turned the world green and grainy, depth warped, shadows stretched into suggestions. The team flowed across the terrain like something practiced and quiet. This was not chaos. This was discipline. They reached the overwatch position and settled in. Moreno lay prone beside Haynes, radio pressed to her ear, listening to the distant murmur of other elements. Minutes stretched. Then movement, someone whispered. A convoy. 3 vehicles. Older models. Inconsistent spacing. No visible markings. Moreno tracked them through optics, mind already running scenarios. The lead vehicle slowed unexpectedly. She felt it before she heard it. Tension rippling through the team. "Possible deviation," Haynes murmured. Moreno keyed her mic. "Hold," she said calmly. "Let them commit." The second vehicle drifted closer to the road's edge. The third stopped completely. Moreno's heart rate did not spike. This wasn't fear. This was recognition. "Sir," a voice crackled in her ear. The ground element lead. "We've got dismounts." Counting 6. Moreno watched them fan out. Too smooth. Too deliberate. "Sir," she said, voice steady. "This isn't a logistics cell. This is a baited kill zone. Silence on the net." Then quietly, "Confirm." She shifted her angle, scanning the ridgeline. There, a glint. Just a suggestion of movement. "Snipers," she said. "At least 2. High ground, grid." She rattled off coordinates without hesitation. The next 30 seconds would determine whether anyone went home. "Abort," the ground lead said sharply. Too late. The first shot cracked the night. Sharp, violent, unmistakable. Dirt exploded inches from a Marine's head. "Contact!" someone yelled. The desert erupted. Rounds snapped overhead, thudding into rock. The convoy disintegrated into motion and noise. The ambush had sprung, but not cleanly. Moreno pressed herself lower, radio alive in her hand. "Shift left," she ordered. "Smoke on my mark." Mark. White plumes bloomed, cutting lines of sight. "Air. This is Orion Fires," she said, voice cutting clean through chaos. "Request immediate suppression. Danger close." There was a pause. Brief but loaded. "Confirm danger close," the pilot replied. "I confirm," Moreno said. "Friendlies within 50. Clear to engage." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't hesitate. The sky answered. Rotors thundered. Precision fire raked the ridgeline, controlled and devastating. The snipers vanished into smoke and dust. The convoy scattered. The team exfiltrated under cover of fire, movements sharp, disciplined. When it was over, the desert returned to its indifferent silence. Back at the FOB, adrenaline drained away in stages. Weapons were cleared, gear stowed. Moreno stood off to the side, hands resting on her vest, breathing slow. Haynes approached her, helmet under his arm. "You saved lives tonight," he said simply. Moreno shook her head. "We all did." He studied her for a moment. "You ever lose anyone before?" The question was casual, but not really. Moreno's eyes flicked briefly. Not away, just inward. "Yes," she said. Haynes nodded. Figured. He hesitated. "You don't talk much about it." "No." "Why?" Moreno considered the question. "Because," she said finally, "talking doesn't make it lighter." It just makes it louder. That was when Haynes understood. This wasn't a captain chasing recognition. This was someone carrying weight. Words spread after that mission, quietly. Not in citations or write-ups, those came later, redacted and sanitized, but in glances, in trust. Moreno became the one people listened to when things went wrong, which, in places like that, meant everything. But it also meant something else. Attention. Not all of it welcome. Back in Building 17, weeks later, General Kessler flipped through a classified folder as the meeting resumed. He did not look at Moreno, but several others did, because buried in those reports, beneath the acronyms and redactions, was a pattern. And patterns threaten systems that prefer narratives. Moreno sat quietly, unaware that her calm answer earlier had just triggered a different kind of operation, one that did not involve helicopters or night vision, one fought in rooms like this, with smiles and jokes. Cliff beat. She survived the desert. Now she's inside the machine, and the machine has noticed. When you're ready, we proceed to part 3, where the joke's consequences begin to unfold. Internal politics surface, and the room starts choosing sides. The joke that exposed the fault line Building 17 did not look different after the meeting. The same concrete corridors, the same muted lighting, the same faint hum of systems designed to never shut off. But for Captain Eliza Moreno, something fundamental had changed. She could feel it in the way conversation stopped when she entered a hallway, in the way eyes tracked her just a second longer than necessary, in the silence that followed her calm answer, a silence that had not ended when the meeting adjourned. It had simply relocated. General Kessler dismissed the board shortly after noon. "Captain Moreno," he said as officers gathered their folders, "remain behind." No one reacted outwardly, but everyone noticed. Moreno stayed seated, hands folded, posture unchanged. When the door closed, the room seemed smaller. Kessler stood and walked to the windowless wall, hands clasped behind his back. For several seconds, he said nothing. He wasn't performing silence now. He was thinking. Finally, he turned. "You embarrassed me," he said plainly. Moreno did not respond immediately. "Sir," she said carefully, "that was not my intent." "I know," Kessler replied. "Which is why it worked." He studied her with new eyes, not as a curiosity, but as a variable. "You could have laughed," he continued. "You could have deflected. You didn't." "No, sir." "Why?" Moreno considered her answer. "Because," she said, "jokes like that teach people what we value." Kessler's jaw tightened slightly. "And what do you think they teach?" "That outcomes matter more than consequences," Moreno said. "And that distance makes killing easier to talk about." Kessler exhaled slowly. "You think I don't understand that cost?" "I think you do," Moreno replied. "Which is why I was surprised." The general's eyes flickered, irritation perhaps, but beneath it was something else. Recognition. "Captain," he said quietly, "you've made powerful enemies without realizing it." Moreno nodded. "I assumed as much." That surprised him. "You're not afraid?" "I'm cautious," she said. "There's a difference." Kessler studied her for a long moment. "You know," he said, "some people survive in this institution by learning when to stay silent." "Yes, sir. And others," he continued, "burn out because they mistake honesty for invincibility." Moreno met his gaze. "I don't believe I'm invincible, sir." "Good," Kessler said, "because what you did today disrupted a narrative." He returned to the table, picked up a thin folder, and slid it across to her. Moreno opened it. Inside were performance reviews, glowing, interspersed with notes that didn't match the tone. Aggressive, unorthodox. Potentially insubordinate under pressure, she closed the folder. "Someone's building a case," she said. "Yes," Kessler replied. "And you just gave them a reason to accelerate." Moreno absorbed that. "Sir," she asked, "why show me this?" The general hesitated, a rare thing. "Because," he said finally, "the institution doesn't correct itself unless someone inside it forces the issue." He straightened. "And because I need to know whether you understand what kind of fight you're in." Moreno stood. "I do," she said. "I've been in it before." Kessler raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" Moreno's voice softened. "Sir, with respect, Task Group Orion wasn't my first exposure to quiet failure." The general waited. She didn't elaborate, and he didn't ask. Some truths are not meant to be excavated, only acknowledged. Very well, he said. You're dismissed. Moreno saluted, turned, left. The door closed behind her with a muted finality. The pushback began within days. A scheduled training rotation was delayed indefinitely. Her name disappeared from a joint exercise roster. Emails went unanswered. Nothing overt, nothing actionable, just erosion. Moreno continued her work anyway. She reviewed reports, advised teams, prepared contingency plans no one asked for, but everyone used. At night, she ran alone along the perimeter fence, breath steady, thoughts contained. She had learned long ago that pressure reveals structure, and the structure here was compromised. The first open challenge came from Colonel David Halverson. He was polished, articulate, and deeply connected, the kind of officer who navigated politics as skillfully as terrain. During a smaller follow-on meeting, he leaned back in his chair and smiled thinly. Captain Moreno, he said, some of us are concerned that your philosophical approach to operations may be clouding practical assessment. Moreno looked at him. In what way, sir? Well, Halverson said lightly, you seem uncomfortable with metrics that the rest of us find essential. I'm uncomfortable, Moreno replied, with metrics that distort reality. A murmur moved through the room. Halverson chuckled. Reality is messy. Metrics give us clarity. They give us approximation, Moreno said. Clarity requires context. And who decides that context? He asked. Moreno didn't flinch. The people who carry the consequences. The room stilled. Halverson's smile faded. Just a fraction. Careful, Captain, he said. That kind of thinking can be misunderstood. Moreno nodded. So can silence, sir. That was the moment lines were drawn. Not dramatically, but definitively. Outside, storms rolled across the base that night. Thunder distant, rain tapping against metal roofs. Moreno stood alone on the observation deck, watching lightning illuminate the horizon. She thought of the desert, of smoke and discipline, of the weight that never made it onto paper. She knew something was coming, and when it did, she would not be able to outrun it. When the room turns quiet. The email arrived at 0217. No subject line, just an attachment and a single sentence in the body. Be prepared to speak plainly. Moreno read it twice. The attachment was a revised agenda for an emergency review session. Expanded attendance, higher clearance thresholds, representation from legal, inspector general, and 2 officers she had never seen in the same room before. This was no longer about tone. This was about control. She closed her laptop and sat still in the dark of her quarters, listening to the faint sound of rain against the window. The base slept around her, generators humming, distant vehicles passing, routine continuing as if nothing were about to break. She did not rehearse answers. She had learned that rehearsed truth sounds like defense. At 0700, Building 17 felt different. Security presence doubled. Phones were surrendered, doors sealed. Inside Conference Room C, the table had been extended. New faces filled the seats. Sharper suits, fewer ribbons, more scrutiny. Colonel Halverson sat 2 chairs down from General Kessler. Their eyes met briefly. Kessler nodded once, not in solidarity, but in acknowledgement. When Moreno entered, conversation tapered off. She took her seat at the end of the table again. Same place, different gravity. Kessler opened the session. We're here, he said, to address concerns raised regarding Task Group Orion's operational culture, reporting integrity, and leadership conduct. No euphemisms left. He looked directly at Moreno. Captain Moreno will speak first. Halverson's jaw tightened. Moreno stood. She felt the room, the tension, the expectation, and let it pass through her without resistance. Sir, she began, I was asked to speak plainly. Kessler nodded. Then I'll start with something simple, Moreno said. We've created a system where success is easy to quantify, and failure is easy to hide, a ripple of discomfort. We reward outcomes, she continued, without accounting for how those outcomes are achieved, or who pays the cost. Halverson interjected. Captain, with respect, this sounds like opinion. Moreno turned toward him. Sir, she said evenly, I can support this with documentation. A murmur. She gestured toward the folder in front of her. After-action reports, she said, edited post hoc to align with performance metrics. Civilian risk assessments reclassified, near-miss incidents downgraded. She paused. Lives reduced to footnotes. Silence. One of the legal officers leaned forward. "Captain," he said carefully, "are you alleging misconduct?" Moreno met his gaze. "I'm alleging normalization." That landed harder. Kessler's expression hardened. Halverson leaned forward now, voice sharper. "Captain Moreno," he said, "you're treading dangerously close to insubordination." Moreno did not raise her voice. "Sir," she said, "I am treading exactly where my oath requires." A few people shifted in their chairs. Kessler watched closely, not intervening, not rescuing. This was her moment to stand or fall. Halverson scoffed lightly. "You think your personal discomfort outweighs strategic necessity?" Moreno turned fully toward him. "I think," she said, "that when strategy demands we stop seeing people as people, it stops being strategy." The room went still. Even the HVAC seemed quieter. Halverson stared at her. "And your solution?" he asked. "Paralysis? Endless caution?" Moreno shook her head. "Accountability," she said. "Clarity. And leadership that doesn't confuse detachment with strength." She took a breath. "And language matters," she added. "When a general jokes about kill counts, it signals something." Every eye flicked, involuntarily, to Kessler. The general did not flinch. Moreno continued. "It signals that distance has replaced reflection, that we've mistaken professionalism for immunity." Halverson smiled thinly. "You're accusing a general officer?" "I'm reminding us," Moreno replied, "that rank doesn't exempt anyone from consequence." The words hung, heavy, undeniable. Kessler stood. The movement startled the room. "Captain Moreno," he said slowly, "you're correct about one thing." He looked around the table. "Language does matter." He turned back to her. "And my comment," he said, "was careless." A collective intake of breath. Halvorson's head snapped toward him. Kessler raised a hand. "I own that," he continued, "and I appreciate being challenged, even publicly, when the challenge is rooted in principle." The power dynamic shifted visibly. Kessler turned to the room. "What Captain Moreno is describing," he said, "is not dissent. It's integrity." Halverson opened his mouth, then closed it. Kessler wasn't finished. "I have reviewed the documentation," he said. "There will be a formal inquiry. Independent." The room buzzed. "Some of us," Kessler continued, "may find that uncomfortable." He looked directly at Halverson. "Discomfort," he said, "is not injustice." Silence. Moreno stood motionless, heart steady, aware that something irreversible had just occurred. Not victory, but momentum. When the meeting adjourned, no one spoke. They filed out quietly, some thoughtful, some furious, some afraid. Moreno remained seated. Kessler approached her. "You didn't flinch," he said quietly. "Neither did you, sir." He nodded. "That won't make you popular. I'm not here for that." Kessler smiled. Not humor this time, but respect. "Good," he said, "because popularity fades. What you did today won't. What survives? After the noise institutions do not change all at once. They shift in increments. Memos rewritten, meetings restructured, people reassigned. The noise comes later, after the decisions are already moving through channels no one sees. The inquiry began within 48 hours. External oversight, independent reviewers, frozen files. Task Group Orion did not stop operating. It simply slowed, the way a body does when it senses internal injury. Moreno was not placed on leave. That surprised her. Instead, she was reassigned, temporarily, to a policy integration cell. A desk job, quiet, indefinite. No one called it punishment. No one called it protection. She took it without comment. The days became structured and still. Fluorescent lights, secure terminals, long hours reviewing doctrine and writing recommendations few would read carefully. She did the work anyway, because discipline, she believed, was not situational. Colonel Halverson was not seen in Building 17 again. The official line cited pending review and operational necessity. Unofficially, everyone knew what it meant. The inquiry had teeth. Some officers avoided Moreno now, others sought her out, cautiously, with questions they had never voiced aloud. "Was it worth it?" one lieutenant asked quietly in a hallway. Moreno considered the question. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but it was necessary." General Kessler requested a private meeting 3 weeks later. No table this time, just 2 chairs in a small office overlooking the motor pool. "I wanted you to hear this directly," he said. He handed her a sealed envelope. Inside, notice of selection for a strategic leadership fellowship, competitive, influential, career-defining. Moreno looked up. "Sir?" "This wasn't charity," Kessler said. "You earned it, and you reminded me of something I'd let calcify." He paused. "Leadership," he said, "isn't about being unchallenged. It's about being worthy of challenge." Moreno nodded. "I'll accept," she said, "but only if I can continue advising Orion." Kessler smiled faintly, already arranged. Months later, the inquiry concluded. Some findings were public, others would never be. Careers shifted, language changed, jokes stopped. Moreno stood one evening at the edge of the base, watching the sun sink behind hangars and antennas. She thought of the desert, of smoke and silence, of the room where nobody laughed. She knew the system wasn't fixed, but it was listening, and sometimes that was enough to begin. In every institution, there comes a moment when comfort and conscience collide. Courage is not loud, it does not posture or demand attention. Sometimes it sounds like a calm answer in a room expecting laughter, and sometimes that is enough to change what follows.